welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. We're NOBL. I'll do introductions here in a second, but I just have to genuinely admit I'm super excited to share what we're about to go through together. Quick introductions. If you have no idea who we are or why you're here or who are these people talking at you or spotlighted, I'm Bud. I'm the founder and CEO of NOBL. Uh, Quick background so you understand my biases. I started off as a software developer, was not a good one, fell into digital strategy consulting, built a ton of innovation labs inside organizations, and a lot of them failed. And I became obsessed with how technology actually diffuses inside organizations and how behavior can be changed and also how it's so resistant to change in organizations. And I became like infected with the bug of organizational development and design and change management. So it's awesome to have you. And I have my wonderful colleague, Jamie, joining me. Jamie, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Hey, folks. Super fun to be here with all of you. I'm coming from Connecticut. So, Bill, hi, neighbor. I am Jamie. I'm an associate principal here at Nobel. I started my career in pretty standard commercial operating jobs in a bank and then a couple other financial services, and then had the chance to become chief of staff to the chief marketing officer of a fairly large bank. And through that work, sparked this heavy interest in organizational development and change and leadership development. And so found my way to Nobel to do that with more organizations, and really love it. Mostly work with executive and leadership teams on strategy development and coaching. So super excited to be here chatting about this today.
Yeah. So just really quickly, a little bit about us, if you haven't heard anything about Nobel, and I won't belabor this one, but Nobel is a change management firm. We were founded in 2014, really to prove that large scale transformation is possible within big, complex organizations and not just build the plans for it, but to actually see it through. We've been able to serve some really amazing clients in all kinds of industries. There's no real focus in terms of industry for us. It's all about like people at work, and that can take so many different forms. Clients tend to call us when they're doing digital transformation. They need like more effective strategy execution. They need culture change, lots of other reasons. You can find all about us at our website, nobl.io. It's shiny and new, by the way. So it's got that new car smell. Go check it out if you haven't seen it in a little while. We also have a great site called Today's Changemaker, formerly the Academy. There's tons of resources like this, like the tools we're about to share today. So if you haven't, you probably know us through our newsletter. But if you haven't subscribed yet, I highly recommend visiting our website, clicking Today's Changemaker, and signing up for our newsletter. So, Jamie, take it away.
Let's do it. So before we get into the meat of it, we're going to do a little bit of a check-in. We clearly have a very open global crew here, which is fantastic. So we're going to do a little bit of a check-in to learn more about who you are and you all to learn about each other. This is going to look like a quick poll that Bud's going to throw up in a second. It's just going to be 2 questions. It's anonymous, so don't sweat it. These answers will not be held to you in perpetuity. But take a shot and answer the poll. And then if you're done and you have a use case that you want to share that you're excited about, that you're pursuing, feel free to throw it in chat too. That's a way for us to just know where people are coming from and also to you guys to share some inspiration across. So for now, why don't we throw up the poll and give, I don't know, 40 seconds. Everybody reply the 2 questions they see.
See responses coming in. If you haven't seen it, click Zoom. You should have a poll in front of you.
Let's do 10 more seconds. Keep them coming. All right. We are pretty well 100% answered. But is there a way, if you end it, does everyone see the results or is everyone seeing it?
Yeah, 1 second. I'm being kind, letting the last trickle come in. 88%. All right, I'm gonna end the poll. 3. You have to make a choice. 3, 2, 1. Poll has been ended. I will share the results.
Awesome. Okay, we are not going to spend a ton of time here because we are actually pre-flighting one of the tools that we're going to share with you, and we'll share more context there. But the things I'll just comment on, clearly this is a group that thinks that AI is going to have an impact on society. Not shocking, given that we're all on a webinar about it at a random Tuesday. So that makes sense. And then we have a pretty broad split around pessimism, optimism, around the impact of it. And that's okay. We're going to get into that and talk about it a little bit more throughout today. But thank you for weighing in. Bud, is anything you want to comment on in terms of results?
Well, good call out from Lindsay too in the chat about it depend like the impacts could depend on who you are. Could be good for some, bad for others. Kind of lands you in that neutral territory. And I think that's pretty indicative of where a lot of us are today about AI. We're cautiously optimistic or guardedly skeptical. That's fun. All right.
Okay, Bud's going to help us forward and move into it. The thing, just the flag, we are going to shut down the public poll and just make it so you can ping the host, meaning Bud or myself or our colleague Paula, who's on. We're doing this again just for the gift of focus to allow everyone to focus in on the presentation, but we still want to take questions. So if you do have questions, please do ping hosts and panelists, and we'll see it, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end.
Yeah,
Thanks.
thank you. And I want to do a bit of framing about what you're about to see and the tools that we've been working on and why we're here. I don't want to belabor this too much because I have a feeling, folks, if you're tuning in, you are already mildly obsessed with AI, or you're at least like me, you cannot avoid it in every place you go, in every medium it's being discussed. But I want to talk about some specifically why NOBL is here, why we're paying attention to this topic. And I think it's, if you don't follow Ethan Mollik, who has become sort of like one of the leading experts and academics on AI and its practical use of AI, please, 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 like if you take one thing away, go follow him. He shares on LinkedIn, on X, on all the platforms, like what he's learning, the experiments he's running with AI. Really smart. He's got a new book out, I do believe. But this quote from him is really the reason why we're here, which is we've all seen the explosion of Gen AI tools like ChatGPT, and the adoption for that has been insanely fast, right? People are experimenting with these tools long before even companies knew to like authorize or stop these tools being used. People were using them at work. But then, so that's the first way of individual adoption. But now adopting AI tools truly at work and making them effective and gaining productivity leaps, that's a completely different puzzle to figure out. Organizational diffusion of technology is its own challenge, and that's what we're focused on. Because for the last 20 years, there's been this search for where is the productivity driver that we were promised with technology. Beginning in the dot-com age, there's been this look of like, why haven't these technologies led to the productivity leap that we were promised? And there's currently like feverish debate in the academic field about where are these gains? And there's a lot of argument about like how much COVID did to derail the overall like use of tools like this, or the development of tools, or societal impacts. There's a lot of conversation now about it being very imminent because of the quick adoption rates of individuals using these tools. But essentially, like that's why we're here as NOBL. We want to see this great leap in enhancing human beings at work, empowering them to do their jobs. And really, it requires effective technology and successful organizational adoption. Obviously, like that's being reductive, but those are the most important things. We're going to focus on successful organizational adoption. This is not going to be a tech presentation about the right tech to use or the right like technical assessment to make. We're going to focus on how do organizations adopt these technologies. And I think it's important to not treat AI like any other tech platform you're bringing into the organization. It's not a standard digital transformation. I think AI is specifically different for 3 reasons. Its space and itself is experiencing chaotic change. So it's not just like the change that's happening now, the evolving use cases. It's the promise of as it gets smarter, the change is only going to increase. Now we'll see if that's true. It's also the challenges at the regulation, at the norms, at the process level that are happening with these tools. Like, what is the data that's being used in training? What does that mean for organizations? What does that mean for morals and ethics? Ultimately, chaotic change results in organizations needing to actively sense and experiment with these technologies, but not just in the near term, right? Oftentimes when we have a new technology, there's a lot of need for rapid experimentation at the beginning of that technology. But because the promise of AI is that it will get smarter and smarter and its use cases will evolve, experimentation has to become a long-term muscle inside organizations. And we've all been talking about this until we're blue in the face for the last 20 years, but this technology is really going to force experimentation. Horizontal disruption just means like the first thing that we got wrong with the dot-com or internet transformation was thinking that we could silo it, thinking that it would only affect like single teams, or we should uh, designate a chief digital officer when it was a horizontal disruption, meaning it's going to affect almost every industry imaginable, almost every function inside an organization. It will require innovation as a cross-functional team, or you will be disrupted more easily. And lastly, AI is different because there are competing purposes and priorities inside organizations already about its use. From help me make my like work more effective, more creative, to let's actually look for ways to reduce headcount through using these tools. Lots and lots of competing priorities, and ultimately, like internal conflicts need to be addressed openly and objectively here, especially at the beginning of this adoption curve. And teams should be very clear about what they're pursuing with these technologies. Jamie, anything you'd add here?
Nailed it.
Nice. So we saw an urgent need for leadership teams to rally, and leadership teams being diverse stakeholders among leadership teams could be an executive team, but also could be sort of like the next layer down of change makers inside the organization who are pushing for adoption of AI. But they need to come together. It needs to be a cross-functional team. They need to seek shared understanding. They need to align about the use of these tools and how they'll roll out, and they need to develop a path forward together. Otherwise, we saw just lots and lots of initial attempts that were failing to adopt AI, and a lot of conflict that was being created inside organizations. And so, Jamie, I'm going to pull you in here too, because you've really been doing a ton of work here. What we're going to see is like ultimately we're looking to build an AI toolkit. We worked with existing clients, interviewed organizations at different stages of their implementation. We ate a ton of research, and then based on that research, started calling experts to get a sense of what was happening for them. Jamie, help me with the caveats around like what we want, how we want these tools used, what their perspective is.
Yeah, for sure. So as Bud mentioned ahead of time, Bud nor I are technologists, right? So we're not going to sit here and claim that we've covered every dot or even attempted to from a technology perspective or come up with any recommendations of tools or anything. The lens we are bringing to this is a socio-technical perspective, right? So saying that there is no society without tech and there's no tech without social. You can't separate those two. They're interwoven systems. And so this is a lens to look at AI implementation adoption through that. It's also critical that we designed this for the intention of it being a cross-functional group of key leaders or change makers, right? This isn't intended to be just for the tech team, but tech is intended to be at the table, right? It's intended to be a cross-functional group because, as Bud said, this is a horizontal disruption. You're going to need all those lenses. And that's what we heard from folks implementing and the experts, is that this was much better done and much better accomplished with a cross-functional group. And as we go, I'll drop in some things about how to actually pull that off. Because I know that in a lot of organizations, that's hundreds of people. And how do you coordinate across that many people? So we'll get into that a little bit. But those are the quick caveats. I don't want anyone walking away being like, they didn't touch at all about data grooming. You're like, yes, that was intentional. So just wanted to put that out there.
Very cool. Thank you, Jamie.
Mm-hmm.
And our efforts here have really evolved. When we got started here trying to build something that would help our clients and something that we could share, we are like, we need a single tool. And that single tool became 3 tools very quickly, because we recognized teams are at different stages of maturity when it comes to design and implementation of AI. Some teams have been doing this for a decade or more. Some teams are just beginning to wrap their heads around it. And there's this spectrum between relational tools. So we need to understand one another and our perspectives and our biases walking into these discussions, all the way to like, what are the hardest trade-offs we need to make about the implementation itself. So we have 3 tools here that we're going to share with you. And again, we're going to share all of these slides and everything. The tools will be completely open source. The first one is AI icebreakers. And really, the goal here is to bridge perspectives and overcome individual biases when thinking about AI as a technology. As we saw before, like depending on how much attention you've paid to this space, you're bringing in a lot of ideas, preconceived notions, even fears or hopes to the field. So let's get them on the table if you're working together as a team designing your implementation. The second tool is AI working principles. So how do we start to craft policies and norms that align behavior? Like we're all seeing a ton of experimentation across organizations right now. Is that experimentation aligned at some level to begin with, right? Do we have do's and don'ts? Like really getting that tactical. And then the third tool is a trade-off navigator. So any system that you'd want to implement, but especially with AI, there are trade-offs to make, there are sacrifices involved. How do you, as a cross-functional team, assess those, discuss those? What are the key trade-offs together to make? And how do you map ultimately a shared strategy? All right, you want to get into it? Let's explore. Let's start with the AI icebreakers. And I'm going to
Sure.
zoom way in so you don't have to have your eyes bleed here. Jamie, take us away.
All right, let's do this. So we're going to spend the least amount of time on the first tool because you already experimented with it during your check-in, but we're going to do a little orientation and walk you through it. So first, just caveat, ahead of each of the tools, you're going to see this purpose, outcome, and process structure. It's just a way to orient you into the tool with a little bit of why it was made, the purpose, the general outcome we're hoping that folks walk away from using the tool with, and then the process by which to walk through it. So for the icebreaker, as Bud said, the intent of this tool is to help folks that are just getting into conversations around AI, they're just starting to orient as a group, to bridge individual perspectives and overcome biases. Candidly, we actually generated this tool because of coming out of our own internal NOBL conversations about AI. We realized that we had some strong biases going on, and we needed to have a place to put them and surface them so that we were aware of them, we had addressed them, and were able to move forward into more kind of concrete next step conversation. So what this really looks like is a tool that kind of codifies the check-in you just did. So as Bud scrolls down, as individuals on your team, you would take a vote to say, okay, I individually react to prompt A, which is the same that you also said. AI will have a dramatic impact on society within the next 3 years, somewhere between 1 to 4. 2 is unsure, right? That's something that we heard from many folks mid-implementation of AI, is that because it's a cross-functional group, you're engaging with folks of a lot of different places. Some just aren't sure yet, right? They haven't done their own research. They haven't played with it. They haven't read the Ethan Mollik work. So this is a place where it's okay to say, I don't know yet, but I'm going to put that out there. And then the other prompt of AI will have a net positive outcome onto individual society. So once you've kind of taken your individual stock of that, they'll go down and one by one, you'll plot it on a chart. And this is a way for the team to start having a conversation of, where are we? How aligned are we? Anyone's position surprising them or not, right? It's a way to open up the conversation that A, it's okay to have different perspectives, and B, let's be aware of them and know where we're plotting. And then after that's been put out there, then as a team, you can get into biases. So what we've done is laid out some of your kind of standard cognitive biases. And it's a way to say, okay, as a team, are we falling for any of these biases? Do we think that we need to be aware of any of these? It's not a problem solving. It's not a super concrete next step. It's just an icebreaker, but it's a way for all of us to recognize that we bring bias to conversations like this. And so it's a really great way of surfacing those and saying, hey, let's always be conscious of groupthink, for example, and how do we keep ourselves aware of that as we go forward in these conversations? So it's a way to prompt conversation about how we're going to make a decision, or as we talk as a team and how we're going to make decisions. And then finally, like any good icebreaker or check-in, there's a beat to just reflect what did we each take from this exercise, right? So again, more of a light-hearted or a light content tool to really get into checking in, but a really nice way to surface those individual biases and start moving forward as a team. Anything you'd add, Bud?
Yeah, like any icebreaker, I think what we're also trying to do is create some psychological safety as a group. And psychological safety depends on understanding how one another's brain works. And for this topic, especially because it's charged in either there are huge upsides for our business if we adopt these tools, or I am highly skeptical of these tools or worried about the detriment to these tools. Right. This is the opportunity to get those ideas on the table, start to understand your colleagues, and also start to own your perspective. So if you're a tech like cynic to know that you are, and also to challenge yourself of like, where am I getting my evidence from? What would it look like to try in a different perspective? Why, is this something that I approach with every single technology? What's the cost of that bias? So, great example.
Awesome.
Hey, how about our second tool?
Ooh, here's where we get into it. All right, so the second tool is AI working principles. And the purpose, again, is to be able to craft policies and norms to align behavior. And so the purpose here, the reason we set out to make this tool is because as we did the research, as we got into everything, what came to the surface is that there are these really strong kind of ethical AI principles emerging where people are saying this is what we need to keep in mind as we implement AI. And they're beautiful and they're super impressive. And they're very high level and hard to think about what does it actually look like for me in my organization. So as a leader, as you're going into your organization and trying to implement this, and you want to follow these principles and these best practices, how do you, right? So this is a tool intended to help those folks that are looking to start crafting policies and aligning behavior in their organizations, but only have these kind of general guiding principles and saying, how do I break this down? So I'm going to orient to the tool, but over here on the left under process, when you get these afterwards, there's a play-by-play of how you would facilitate this conversation. I'm not going to go through it to that much depth, but I wanted to just orient that every tool, again, has a process feature that you can follow through. But if we get into the tool, I'll just orient you to what's here. So at the top, this is a shelf to just put your existing organizational values. Pretty much every organization in the world has some form of values, whether implicit or explicit, usually explicit on the wall of an office, if that still exists. This is a place to capture those because every organization has values and it's a really nice grounding place to say, okay, we know who we are. Now let's look at this through the lens of AI. And so what we've done here is kind of coalesce a lot of these large principles into 4. This is not all inclusive, right? But what we thought about was if I'm a leader and I'm thinking about how to navigate my organization, these 4 are kind of the biggest headlines I need to keep in mind. And then what's below them in the colored stickies, pink, blue, green, purple, are really kind of probing questions to make you think about, okay, that's a wonderful principle. What does it look like in my organization? And that conversation should hopefully lead you to some really simple do's and don'ts of what we're going to do in our company or our organization. So to make that real, I'm going to dive into one. But across the board here, you can see the 4 principles are around human-centeredness. I'm going to zoom in a little bit, but we're pretty small.
Yeah.
Human-centeredness, control and accountability, observability, and explainability, and then improvement and responsiveness. So why don't we just dive into improvement and responsiveness, and I'll kind of make this real. So you would look at this principle and say, AI systems should be continuously improved to enhance their performance and address any emerging issues. Makes a lot of sense. It's a new tool. How we're going to continuously improve it and enhance it over time. But now let's make that real for us as an organization, right? Are there examples where we've successfully demonstrated our culture of learning and improvement? What can we learn from that, right? We work with organizations every day that are trying to enhance their culture of learning and improvement. And often it's by pointing to certain projects that said, we lived it there, I want to live that again, or I never want to do that thing again, right? So by making it real and reliving that project is a really good way of saying, where do we do this and what can we learn from that in implementing AI? Do our current feedback processes ignore or deprioritize any stakeholders or groups, right? Really good to be aware of how your current feedback systems work and whether you have any gaps and if you're okay accepting that when implementing AI or not, right? Do you need to accept those in some way? What criteria will we use to define performance? Every organization looks at this differently, right? Success for one is not success for another, but you as a leadership group need to be clear on how you're going to be measuring success. We saw a lot of great examples of this as we talked to different people implementing. And then finally, how will we maintain the long-term commitment required to test and improve these systems, right? So recognizing that to continuously improve over time, we actually need to commit long-term. How do we do that? And then that leads into a conversation to say, okay, in our organization, we will do this, we will not do this. So for example, on that last one, just to make this real, in terms of something that you might do, we talked to one organization who, recognizing they needed to do long-term commitment and actually see this over time, moved AI from their kind of back-end technology team. So they moved the budget, they moved the experts from the back-end team to the front-end kind of more strategically oriented tech group because they had 2 different funding and budgeting models. Basically, their back-end tech teams were funded in a very like quarterly annual um, kind of run the engine method versus they had strategic initiatives that were funded at a more 3 to 5 year level. And they wanted that AI lens on that from a long-term continuous improvement lens, right? So it's an example of we will treat AI like a strategic initiative. So those are the kind of do's and don'ts that can come out of a conversation like this that really allows your organization to align its behaviors and make some choices. Um, a couple of click downs from a high level principle base. That's kind of the goal of a tool like this. And I recognize that that was a very fast run through of a very robust tool. I'm going to take a beat. And Bud, is there anything else that you'd highlight or call out?
Yeah, I think Lauren in the chat asked a really good question about when you go through these discussions, do you open up to the full group or provide some kind of structure for people? What I think is interesting and like who that'll always be a big question for these exercises, like who is the right group to convene. I think honestly, to generate do's and don'ts, I think you can go really wide to begin with if you want to, because like what you're trying to do is get a bunch of different perspectives and almost pre-mortem what could go wrong with these tools in the system. That doesn't mean you have to adopt everything they generate from a do's and don'ts, but that's a really cool brainstorm that you can do with teams by looking at, again, these general AI principles. We won't have captured every single one that's in the world, but academics are starting to coalesce around a shared set of principles. And again, like they can feel very aloof. So it is interesting to ask some of these probing questions with a diverse group of people, see what their do's and don'ts would be, and then as a smaller team, sort through those, make some critical decisions about your organization. And again, go back up to your existing values and let those inform the decisions that you make here. And what we're aiming for, like it's very simple do's and don'ts. Like this is still a very frothy, fast moving, emerging space. You don't want yet, unless your organization is very mature already, draconian rules potentially in these places. You want heuristics, rules of thumb that you can capture. One of my favorite examples of that is like on Google's AI page where they talk about their use of AI and their principles. They also just net out at the bottom, like these are the use cases we're most interested in exploring, and these are the use cases we are not interested in exploring. For example, like AI enabled weapon systems. They're like, that is not a place we're putting our effort right now. And we're going to think about how our own tools are being used um, and potentially could be used for those applications. So I think that's a really cool way of doing it.
Yeah. Might throw in one quick plug for today's change maker, but Lauren, if you think you're walking into a room where people are going to have a lot of perspective and kind of need that orientation of who's making the decision coming out of this, right? Like that's a kind of psych safety element. But there's a great piece on today's change maker about deciding how to decide. And that might be some pre-work you do before this kind of convening to say, okay, if we do think we need to make some choices on do's and don'ts, who makes that call? Is it consensus? Is it authoritative? So it just allows you to have that kind of deciding how to decide before going in if you think you're in that kind of room, which happens.
Yeah, and Alexandra's in the chat also asked the question of like how will people know do's and don'ts when this is such a new space? And like what do they need to know to come into it? So I also think do's and don'ts, again, they're not set up as like rules or even explicit norms yet. They're do's and don'ts because they should be malleable. Like they need like the last step in our instructions is like set a time in the future to review these and reflect on them and make changes. These
Mhm.
these are not your values and that like you write your values and they should stay there for 5 years or 10 years. These are do's and don'ts. Like let's try in the near term. Let's say for the next 6 months, we're going to pursue AI with these do's and don'ts, but we're going to reflect on it within 2 months, within 3 months and challenge ourselves. Were we short-sighted here? Did we not see this edge case? So again, these are meant to be more malleable.
I'd also just say, just given to where Bud started this with the Ethan Mollik quote, because there's so much individual experimentation going on, doing nothing isn't really an option. Like if you don't have conversations as a leadership team, if you don't come up with a cohesive do's and don'ts plan, individuals are going to do as they will, right? And so that doesn't mean that you have to have all the answers. To Bud's point, this is iterative. This is a thing to be revisited. But putting something out and starting to guide your own leadership thinking, even if it is we need to go read a lot more or we need to pull in somebody to help us with this conversation, this is a pretty important step to be aligning that effort.
Yep. All right, you were ready
Cool.
to move on.
Let's do it.
Tool number 3.
Yeah, and if you can have a favorite child, this is mine. I like this tool a lot, and that is
Oh,
because
you're breaking my heart.
I
All
know,
right, go for it.
sorry. But as Bud said, I do believe that the core strategy is sacrifice and making choices, and I think it's the thing that we tend to struggle with the most as leaders is putting that stake in the ground and making an explicit choice. But it is the thing that it makes our thinking the clearest, and it is the thing that makes it the easiest to follow for an organization and actually take cohesive and coherent action. So, super excited about this. Again, the purpose of it is to map a shared strategy. And what we've done is surface the tensions that we have heard consistently over implementing AI in organizations and given you a tool to navigate those choices and again get explicit about what you're choosing and accepting the consequences of those choices because all choices have consequences. So that's the overall thing. When you get this, you can read the process by which to go through it. But I'm just going to orient a little bit to the different topics. Maybe by we zoom in on the first one to give a sense of what each one looks like, and then we'll just kind of skim through the rest. But so, for example, again, these are topics or tensions that we have heard throughout talking to folks implementing AI. So the first one is around control. How will we manage the introduction and use of AI in our organization? On one end, we have it's going to be a centralized function that sets direction and oversees decisions. On the other, it's autonomous teams or departments that make decisions for themselves. Neither of these ends are bad or good on their surface, right? They are about how we as an organization think it's best for us to implement AI. And then within each one, you'll see potential trade-offs, right? So if we're going to go for a centralized function that sets direction and decisions, this is likely going to lower risk because it's more controlled. It might drive some cost savings and things as we have one subscription to Copilot or whatever it is. But we also likely will move a little bit slower and might be a little less creative because it's hard for one group to have all the creative answers, right? On the other end, we're going to have autonomous teams and with departments making decisions for themselves, move faster, have more creativity, probably a little bit more risk. And also just to say, probably need a bit more of a creative way of getting communication and kind of do those do's and don'ts out there because you're still going to need a coordinated fashion around that experimentation. So you're going to have to stand those things up and maybe even a more creative budgeting process to allow for the ad hoc project, right? So again, either end has potential trade-offs, both good and bad. So you as a group would go through and say, maybe one by one, slide it down, see where you feel, see if you're aligned enough to be safe to try and let's go forward. Or if not, and you need more information or to bring on other folks. And then for each decision, what's critical is to say, okay, we've made this choice. Who needs to know this, right? So if we're going in a purely centralized function, who is critical that they know about this in the organization and how are they going to find out? And then also back to the whole thing of this being barely wet cement and a really dynamic frothy environment. When are we going to reschedule to look at this again? What are our reasons to revisit these choices? What evidence might we get that says, okay, we need to revisit that choice, right? So really holding ourselves accountable to revisit and retro our choices. So that's kind of a high level of how you'll use each one. Why don't we just skim down and just look at the tensions that we kind of laid out? But so that first one's around control.
Yeah, and
The
the one thing I'd
second,
jump in to
oh yeah,
say,
sure.
Jamie, is that the topics here, what's fascinating here is like for your organization, the topics will probably be different, but the topics that we chose were the ones that were most surfaced from the interviews that we did with organizations. So again, like they may not be the perfect ones for you, but they're the ones that created the most friction and impasses and like key decision moments for the organizations that we interviewed or that we've been working with. And again, the trade-offs underneath it will be very contextual to you, your industry. Like these are suggested trade-offs, but this is when I could see a team taking this tool and like and making it their own, changing the topics if they need to, rehashing the trade-offs, capturing like covering this thing with stickies. But again, like we're trying our best to give you a start, like a place to begin these conversations based on lessons learned from other organizations.
Well said. So that first topic that we picked was around control. The second one's about priority. What is the current purpose for introducing AI in our organizations? This is a big one that we did see surface a lot, right? Are we doing this purely for efficiency's sake, for cost out? Are we doing this for differentiation, some type of innovation, really differentiating ourselves from competitors, kind of that top line growth area? So really playing with that tension of efficiency versus differentiation. The third topic is around users. Who do we want to primarily use AI systems at this time? Internal employees to external customers. We understand that you can do both, but there are some inherent tensions in terms of why we're choosing who we're choosing. So this is about who we're primarily setting up to use AI systems in our organization at this time. And then the final two are about communication. So the first one's about external comms. How public do we want to be with our AI approach right now? We want to shy away from it and not put attention on it for now. It obviously gives time for experimentation and testing. The other end, let's get loud and let's bring attention to it. We clearly see a lot of organizations today running hard and getting that headline and taking advantage of that hype cycle, right? So this is really a choice. And they both come with consequences and trade-offs. And then finally, there's the internal communication. How transparent do we want to be about our AI approach right now? This is always a conversation and change, right? But this is unique, especially in AI with the different impacts that it can have. So on one end, keep information only to key decision makers. On the other one, openly design and discuss plans with our workforce. And then you divide into the trade-offs from there. So as Bud said, these might not be perfect for your organization and definitely a place to beat them up, add, change whatever you're looking for. But this kind of tool is sent to say, these are the tensions. Neither end is bad or good. How do we want to operate as an organization and how do we hold hands in the trade-offs?
And I think one of the best feedback loops for this tool is if you take these topics individually, but then you zoom back out again and understand the conflicts now you've created for yourself, where if you want autonomous teams because, for example, like the risks are low and you want teams experimenting with it, but then you might go back to, there's a big push around efficiency right now, though. So how do we get teams to experiment towards efficiency if that efficiency could ultimately harm those employees, lead to job displacement at the furthest end? And then how does that change your approach to how you communicate and how you involve employees in the design of it? Like these sliders together become incredibly powerful and start to create a nuanced approach to AI. And again, like what we're trying to do here with this tool specifically is save you some time in the traffic jams that will come for these conversations, right? Let's get ahead of them. Exactly what Jamie said. These are the core, like, sacrifices, conflicts that we saw within organizations, and let's begin to map these now, have that conversation. So it's not last minute. We have time to think that because this takes deliberation and this takes debate. And we hope it's open and rational debate, not closed and passive arguments.
The final thing I'll add here that I wanted to say too, just from our experience of working with organizations in broader change beyond AI, is that you also can gain a lot of credibility as a leadership team by talking about your trade-offs and what you're not doing. But we tend to find is most change is additive, right? Different teams get excited about different changes and they keep adding it on. And the recipients of those changes, the teams themselves, often just feel like we want to do everything. We want to do it all, right? And so if you can have conversations that are clear to say, we want to go in this direction and we recognize it means putting these initiatives on hold or not doing this or making this trade-off. It's a really incredible way of communicating that we're aware that we can do anything, but not everything. And it really can help ease a team, make a team feel heard and that they're being, their time is being respected and they're making hard choices. So I just put that out there because it tends to be an undertone often in change.
All right, I'm going to zoom ahead. So that's what we call the AI Strategic Vision Toolkit. It's a mouthful. It's a lot, but I want to do a quick wrap up of what we think it's useful for and how you should use it. So obviously this was created because we believe that leadership teams or a diverse set of change makers inside an organization that are pushing for the design and implementation of AI need convening tools. They need tools to help foster better conversations and better designs of these programs. There are three tools to the AI Icebreaker. So let's get our biases and perspectives on the table. Let's start to create some shared understanding among the team. There's our AI working principles that really distill some very high level ethical, moral principles from AI researchers into clear do's and don'ts that can change, should change, but should start to guide behavior and align behavior across teams. And then there's like, okay, let's deal with the messiest conflicts, the messiest sacrifices together as a leadership team, as a steering team, and let's tackle those choices. Let's understand the shape of our program overall, the shape of our initiatives, so that we have made clear decisions, so that we're not like constantly having the same conflict over and over. We've had that opportunity to debate together. Jamie, is there any last words on the tools themselves? And also get your questions in right now. That'd be great. We've gotten some great questions along the way. We're watching chat. We have a few minutes left that we can cover some questions.
No, I think the
You're a
final,
woman of
actually,
few
I
words.
lied.
Oh, there you go.
One quick,
Yeah.
yep, sorry, I lied. One quick, I think the thing that I'll just say too with these is you get into them and think about actually leveraging them. I don't think you said this, but apologies if I'm repeating it, is that they should be used, they can be used individually. We created
Yeah.
them because we kept finding new doors into this conversation and wanted to help meet teams where they were. And they can be used linearly. So you can start with an icebreaker and then go through principles and then get into trade-offs. If you have, an extended period of time with a cross-functional group and really want to work your way through it. But we just share that they are intended to stand alone, but can be used altogether. Okay. Should we dive to questions, bud?
Yeah, I'm watching them come in right now. So I'm reading, and also give folks another minute or two to get any questions in.
I'd love to hop in. I'm just seeing kind of a couple around different implementation use cases, kind of like really thinking about what it looks like to implement AI, not the tools, but AI in general.
Mhm.
And given that we had some really cool interviews with folks, I thought I'd just throw out 2 or 3 stories that we heard, because we really, just to say it, we tried to keep these tools very neutral, right? And very much about you creating your own decisions based off of this. But I'll share some choices that organizations have made that seem to be helping in line with what they're doing. So just really quick on that, and Bud, then I'll let you hop in on a question. For example, to the tension between kind of efficiency and innovation or differentiation. We talked to one group who was really trying to do this not from an pure efficiency standpoint, but really trying to kind of enhance human work and really improve the lives of humans at work. So they decided for the first year they're not measuring ROI of any AI initiative, right? So they're not going to measure the return on investment for the first year because they think that if that is a measure on any project, that it'll just drive efficiency play, right? So they're just not even measuring it. And yes, they got their CFO on board with that for a year. So that's just an example of that. Alexandros, you asked a really interesting question that has got me thinking a bit too of like, how do you make these do's and don'ts if you don't know what you don't know? Not to add complexity, but to just throw it out there. We talked to one organization that started these conversations at a more mid-level cross-functional group leadership level with folks that did know, right? So brought in some of the technology teams that were really plugged in with AI, understood what it would take from a back-end perspective. Also clarifying there that yes, all this recent hype is around Gen AI, but we also talk to many folks that are like, look, we've had AI in our organization for 10 years. We have some experience with this, which is just a different world right now, a little bit of a different world. So they started the conversation at a level with folks that did know more. And then what those folks did was lay out 3 options. So you can imagine the trade-off dials, right? They laid out 3 options of something like that, not that obviously, but saying there's a world where we go for pure efficiency. There's a world where we go for experimentation, and laid out those choices and then brought those to the executive team that's more plugged in at the organizational values and strategy level and said, okay, we're more comfortable with this option, right? So to your point, sometimes it takes breaking it up from the people that know versus the decision makers from a business strategy and culture perspective. But that was a way that they navigated through that to get to those kind of clearer trade-offs and choices they needed to make. So it doesn't answer every implementation question we got, but I just wanted to share some examples of choices that different organizations are making.
I love all the stories that we learned. It's like we were kind of brimming with them and didn't know how to bring them in because we learned so much, and it was so there's so much variation in how organizations were approaching this. Like we expected to see like 1 or 2 clear paths. And it's like, it's still so early for a lot of these organizations. Again, at the organization level, right? Like some teams may have been using these technologies, but the idea of like we are forming a larger strategy and approach, it's so early still, which is why I think we needed these tools that live at different maturity levels. We got some really tactical questions, which I'm happy to answer, but they're also in the slides themselves about in terms of like time for each of these activities. Like the icebreaker itself, 30 minutes to 60 minutes, but also like this can just be like ongoing conversation for you as a team. Like we found we kind of walked ourselves into this tool because like we on Monday mornings like just have an open discussion about whatever's interesting related to our work in the news or what people are talking about and kind of backed our way into it. Like it was a great Monday morning way to like get our brains going and also start to like dump our brains on the table for one another. The working principles, like I think, start with 90 minutes, but it can obviously go a lot longer, especially if you want to engage more people in the organization. It would be a great exercise to do it on all hands to get a ton of feedback and then take a team through a 90-minute session, like a smaller team, to start to look at it and make decisions. Be a really fun activity. I think mapping a shared strategy, that's a half day, that's a full day. Depends on the team, depends on the size of the team, depends on the maturity of what you've approached. Like it's hard for us to make blanket guesses there. So use your best judgment about the team you have and where they are in the process.
Mm-hmm.
Just looking at questions.
I'm looking at one about an example that organization conducted a test where AI resulted in better organizations or improved conditions for their operating model. I will own that this was not a one-on-one conversation, but I heard a neat presentation from the innovation group at Clorox, actually, that talked about how they used AI in their ideation process. So where traditionally, I'm sure many of us, if not all of us, have been part of ideation sessions where you bring in 20 folks that rarely work together into a room. They generate tons and tons of stickies of ideas. There's theming, there's priorities, and they walk out with 3 or 4 things that might be tried, right? And then go from there. That process they injected AI into and actually ran experiments to see what generated better ideas. And by better, I think they meant how well purchasing intent performed in test environments, right? So the generating a product the customer said that they would intend to buy. And what they found was that pure AI solutions did not performed better than pure human solutions, human generated solutions, but the solutions that performed best were AI generated and then human kind of beat up, right? So unsurprising, human in the loop worked better for them at this stage where they were able to kind of generate all those ideas through AI and then have humans really put their experience and creativity lens to it to then come up with product tests. So maybe not exactly what you're talking about because it's not an internal organizational, but I think it definitely improved the output of their ideation sessions. And they also said, one woman said, I've been in this work for 25 years and I've never had more fun. Right. So they're also just taking out some of that grunt work of the ideation process. So that's just an example that we heard.
Yeah, and another example I read, and the source is not in my brain right now, but one of the interesting studies I read and kind of fell into like overseeing a discussion among academics was like the early use of Gen AI tools, especially among like creative tasks. It was very hard to measure whether that made those folks more productive, but it made their enjoyment at work better. And there was a real question of like, is that enough then for organizations, right? If we don't make people more productive, we can't measure that, but their engagement level at work or their like joy at work or interest at work goes up, is that enough? Is that what we're looking for? So I thought that was an interesting discussion. Like if we gain no productivity leap, but engagement at work is higher, or commitment to organization or some other factors, like is that a worthwhile activity for us to do? Okay, I think we're coming to the end of questions. And if we didn't get to any specific questions, if we overlooked you, please, please, please reach out. I'm going to do a quick close so that we can keep everyone on time. I know people have places to be. Well, not really places to be, Zooms to be. So let me quickly just just one, share some deep gratitude with you for joining with us, for being the first people who've actually really experienced these tools together in this way. We're excited to continue talking about these tools and to share them with the world. And Nobel, like we've been around since 2014. We've openly shared things as we learn them and as we use them and as we develop them with our clients. And it's enabled us to have a really cool community around us. And also it's really fun to see what people do with these tools, how they take them, how they like modify them, remix them. And that's just one of the coolest things in the world to like, I've been in co-working spaces in London and walked across and saw our materials literally being done. We'll be running a workshop down the hall. That was like one of the coolest experiences of my life. So please, like, feel free to take these tools, remix them, like, tell your friends about them too. That'd be great. But also contact us if you need help facilitating these with your organization, especially if you're a large, complex organization. We've got so many questions about like how do we design the groups, how much time, how do you help people through decision making together? That is what we are very good at. So please follow up with us. You can visit our website, nobl.io.